All right, Speedmaster small block Mopar head. I'm going to try to get through this and just give you guys hard numbers because I've been working on it for 2 days and all I end up with is 20 minutes of me rambling about shit. So here's the springs. I pulled 2 exhaust valve and 1 intake valve. The reason I did that is 1 intake is a fairly good representation of the head. On the exhaust, you have your outside port and your inside ports are a big difference in shape on the small block Mopars, and I wanted to be able to see both styles of the exhaust and get a good representation. The port itself is big, I think too big. There's a weird angle. This isn't just a shadow. This, what you see all the way around, is it comes out and then it makes a weird angle to this huge unnecessary port window all the way around the port there. That's on the exhaust there. You can see the same thing here. You can see that taper all the way around the window that I think is completely unnecessary. I think they went way too big. I think they took out way too much floor here. That's not gaining you anything in flow. I think it's just unnecessary. And what I think you're going to end up with is, I think most of you, if you hold a piece of construction paper over your exhaust manifold or your header and you take a razor blade and you cut out the ports and you put a drill bit through your bolt holes that holds it to your header or manifold, and then you cut out the port with a razor blade and then you transfer that over to your head, I think what most of you are going to find is that your manifold or your header is probably a full 1/4 inch here or more. You're going to find that your flange overhangs the port and be disappointed. I don't know for sure. I haven't done that, but based on some of the other heads and things that I've worked on, I think that's what you're going to come across. The port looks good out of the box, and then you're going to bolt on your manifold or your header and you're going to choke it way down and screw up any kind of flow that it might have had on a flow bench. The casting's nice. I like their casting. I like their quality on their casting. Here you've got something like 200 or 250 thousandths of stacked up shims. I have no idea what they were doing there. Disappointed in that. I don't know if that's to get your spring pressures up, and then say on like the hydraulic flat tappet version, they take the shims out and they only run a single shim, and that drops your spring pressure with the same actual valve spring. I don't know, but to me that could have been done better. That's poor. Again, I'll say I like the casting, not against the casting. Exhaust, I don't think there's much to do with it. There's a little transition between the machining. You can clean it up some, but I think out of the box you should be fairly happy with the exhaust, aside from that huge port exit window. On the intake, you almost can't feel the transition at all between the machining and the casting. That was nice. And then I'm looking down the intake port and I'm thinking, man, I wouldn't touch anything. I wouldn't reshape it. It looks good out of the box. Then I run into this huge lip here you can see in the casting. So that all has to get ground out. It's a huge, you can feel it, quite prominent lip there. That's got to get ground out, but that's an issue in itself. The valve seal and everything looks good on the seats. Let me see if I can. There's your port. Looks wise, not really disappointed. Good port window. You can clean up the pinch a little bit, but they give you a good window out of the box. I'm not 100% disappointed in the chambers, but you're very rough. I mean, you can cut yourself. If I can show you that. They're off the plug. So that should be cleaned up at the very least. Disappointment in the chambers is, look at this sunken valve seat. There is a huge huge lip here where they sunk in that valve seat. That is really disappointing. It's not such a big deal on the exhaust, but on the intake, what they did right there, see, there's your casting. That's how sunk in you are. That definitely needs to be cleaned up. That's an area that I don't like at all. The rest of the chamber's fine. I held a head gasket up to it. It seems to fit fine. There's a small amount of deshrouding that could be done potentially if you wanted on a bigger bore, on a 40 over 360. You can do some on a 391. You're probably fairly tight already, and even possibly overhanging a factory 391 bore. But overall, they're not bad. So let's get into the hard numbers. Here's my valve spring compressor, worked good. There's where I tested my springs. These are the tools that I use to get my measurements. I'm sorry I don't have a good representation of an LA head. I have an OEM Magnum head, and then I've got my Edelbrock Magnum heads. The only LA head that I have here is a semi-ported, a half-ported 340X head, and the measurements aren't a good representation of an LA head, either unported or ported. So to compare to that head is not really apples to apples. We'll compare it, since I've got the numbers of an OEM Magnum head and out of the box Edelbrock head. We can compare it to those numbers and see where we end up. Springs, they advertise 135 pounds closed, 325 pounds open. They advertise a 1.8 installed height as your closed, and then they advertise a max of 600 lift, so I'm using the 600 for open. And you can see I come out 135, 140 at 1.8, and 335 at 600 lift. So their numbers that they're giving you are accurate. This is the hydraulic roller spring, is the way that they sell these heads. They also have a hydraulic flat tappet version. However, I will say these numbers here, I also gave you a 500 because most of you guys are going to have a 480 to 550 lift cam, and somewhere in that range is going to be what the majority of you guys end up running. So I gave you your 500 numbers. Even though these are advertised as a hydraulic roller for an aggressive hydraulic flat tappet, you know, the 3rd through 5th stage of Lunati Voodoo or Comp Extreme Energy or an Extreme Energy HL, the high lift that they have for the Mopar lifter, these numbers are going to be good for a lot of your flat tappets as well. So there's the springs. At your intake, I did the same thing. I gave you your width and your height at the port, and then I gave you your usable width and the height at the pushrod pinch, and then I gave you your cross section. So they started to look decent. A 318 30 over at 6,000 RPM wants a 177 cross section, and a 360 30 over at 6,000 wants a 2.01 cross section. Out of the box, these Speedmasters are 1.9. So that number looks good to me. You got a 1.87 on your OEM Magnum, and a 1.81, actually smaller, on an out of the box Edelbrock. So the 1.9 starts to look pretty good. But here's where they screwed up. The bowl measurements, nice big bowl. Let's compare it to the Edelbrock out of the box. Both these heads are 202 160 heads. So they're 1.965 in the bowl and a 1.85 in the throat. Bigger in the bowl and the throat. Even bigger than, this is my fully ported Edelbrock, and this is a head I'm happy with. So they're 1.965 and 1.85. And fully ported, I ended up 1.865 and 1.828. They are quite a bit bigger, and that, I'll tell you right now, is where Speedmaster absolutely effed up the ball on this thing, and I can't think of a nicer way to say it. So my ratio between my throat and my 202 valve, I ended up 90.5%. I was right around 90%, but I did some finer polishing and some changing things that I, just couldn't leave it alone. I ended up 90.5%. Your OEM Magnum, there's quite a bit of room to improve. The 2 rules I've told you guys over and over and over. You don't touch the short side. You don't reshape it. You can clean it up with a sand roll, but you don't make a significant change to the as-cast shape that they designed into the port. That is a great way to screw up your head if you're not a guy with a flow bench. The other thing is you never go over 90% of your ratio between your intake valve diameter, your 202 valve, and your throat, your tightest spot here underneath the seat, underneath your valve job. Your tightest spot is your throat. You never go over 90%. Now I ended up at 90.5 with a little cleaning up. I'm fine with that. But out of the box, this Speedmaster is 91.58%. They have screwed that up. That's not a small screw up. That is a big screw up. An absolutely ported to the max, race team that knows what they're doing might be 93, 94%. But most of the time, they are going to adhere to that 90% rule. Right where I came in at 90.5%. The difference between that is huge. It's 1%, right? Between 90.5 and 91.5. But the difference there in your numbers and your Venturi effect and your 300 and 400 thousandths lift numbers is huge. Speedmaster screwed that up. There's no other way for me to say it. And because it's already too big, you can't do anything with your OE Speedmaster head, your OE parts to improve that. Any kind of taking out this lip here, anything you do is only going to make it worse, and this lip needs to be ground out. So I'll just say my recommendation right there is to buy these castings bare. I like the casting. I'm not against the casting. Buy them bare, and then make sure you buy a 205 or a 208 intake valve, and you assemble them that way. That's going to knock your numbers back down to where you can work with them. Here's the spacing. They give you a ton of room. In the cylinder head world, this is a ton of room to be able to run a bigger valve. It's not going to screw with your cylinder wall. I did hold a gasket up here. So again, if you want to run these heads, make sure you do a 205 or a 208 intake valve, and then you let your head guy know, to pay close attention to that percentage number there, because these are just way too big out of the box. I got no other way to say it. They F that up bad. Here's your exhaust. Again, it's huge. 1.404. You're a little bit smaller than the Edelbrock out of the box, but that's down in the bowl. So you've got less bowl area than an Edelbrock. And this is an out-of-the-box, untouched Edelbrock in this column. That's my ported one. So you got less bowl area, but then you open up to this huge-ass window for no reason. So this port isn't going to be any better than this port at all. And if anything, you're going to have more overlap with your headers, your exhaust manifold on this port. It's going to create more turbulence there in the port than the Edelbrock. So while it looks good, and if you flow these on a bench without an exhaust manifold or header, this probably flows some good numbers. But real world, I think the Edelbrock is going to outperform it in the exhaust area. And definitely in the intake. Absolutely in the intake. I'm going to keep coming back to that because that's a major F up in my book. And something that's almost inexcusable in the head. So there's the heads. There's the numbers. So I'm going to cut this off before it ends up into 20 minutes of rambling. That's what I got. Disappointed.